In conversation with David Fradin. David Fradin is a proud son of Hymie Fradin, a very good humorist, but grew up to be a master plumber. Being of French aristocracy descendants, Duke Davis somehow got letters his dad wrote to his brother Maurice during the after World War II. Amy always wanted to be published, and here Duke Davis is granting Amy's wish. David Fradin was a classically trained product manager at Hewlett-Packard during the 50 years that HP grew 20% a year. Apple recruited him to bring the first hard disk drive on a personal computer to market. He soon rose in Apple's management rank to the same level as Steve Jobs by heading the Apple's product line and providing the profit that helped fund the development of the Macintosh. Since 1969, he has worked on over 75 products and services at 25 small, medium, and large organizations and 11 startups covering hardware, software, services, internet, SaaS, mobile advertising, online training, video, and for not-profit Public Policy Association and political campaign. David has written many books on product sources like building insanely great product, organizing and managing insanely great product, and the widely published successful product design and management toolkit. All are on Amazon worldwide under the author name David Fradin. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my joy, utmost pleasure, and excitement to have on the show today David Fradin. Welcome on the show, David.
Glad to be with you.
I'm very excited we are here to sit down and talk about your amazing books. I see they have such an amazing genre, such an amazing topic to talk about, which I think it's quite uncommon and quite beautiful. So thank you very much for coming on. Yeah. So, David, I'd like us to start today's conversation by you telling us the making of your book, the one titled Letters from My Amy on Amazon. I would like to ask you how the book come about. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, my dad's name was Hyman, Hyman, and he's
Mhm.
sometimes by the nickname Hymie. And he was a very good writer, knew how to type. And during World War II, when he was stationed around the United States and in Cuba, he sent a
Mm.
bunch of very funny letters home to his family, principally his older brother, who was also the librarian for the U.S. Navy at the Pentagon. And his older brother Morris kept the letters, and somehow my cousin Diane got a hold of them. And a couple years ago, she sent them to me, and I
Mm.
started reading them. And they're very funny, and they also give you a glimpse of history of what it's like
Mm.
to be the U.S. military during World War II. Also, I somehow came across a 18-page dictated audio
Wow.
autobiography from my grandfather, Louis
Mm.
Fradin, who rose up through the ranks of blacksmith in Ukraine and eventually became the blacksmith to the governor of Kiev. And then in 1914, the
Mm.
governor gave him a few $100s and said, "Get out of the country before we have our ninth pogrom and you get killed by the Cossacks." So he left the country, and I have that history of his growing up and then leaving Ukraine and coming to Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And then in my research, I found that there was a Fradin group on Facebook, which has about 400 members.
Wow.
And a book was written about the Fradins in France called The Book of Fradin. It's in French. So I translated it on Google Translate and
Mm.
found that my grandmother about 26 generations ago, when she was
Mm.
15 years old, left Spain in 1492 or 1493, when
Wow.
Spain was having their Inquisition and telling everybody either convert to Catholicism or get out of the country or we'll kill you. So she left and she was traveling north through southeastern France, and
Mm.
her little travel group was attacked by some thieves. And a gallant man by the name of Julian Fradin uh, who had a sword, came to her rescue and fell in love with her, converted to Judaism. And then the Fradin family went on from there to be a general in Napoleon's army. And one of them was appointed a duke by King Philip VI of France,
Mm,
which means if you follow the aristocracy of France down through the ages,
mm.
uh, I am therefore a duke,
Wow.
except in the French Revolution in 1880, they stopped doing that, but I ignore that. So that's why the book is under the author's name, Duke David Fradin, on Amazon worldwide.
Wow, that's an amazing touch into the making of letters from Amy. And I must say that's quite beautiful, really. Your take on that, the storyline, the foundation of the making of that novel, of the book, sounds to me to be quite great. Now, I wanted to ask you because your father's story touched on his Ukrainian roots and his time serving during World War II. Could you share a bit more about that history? What immigration from Ukraine was like at that time compared to now, and also how it shaped his life and experiences beyond the war, if in any way?
Well, my grandfather was of draft age during the Russian-Japanese War. And to avoid being sent to the front line, he
Mm,
burned his lungs with muriatic acid, and that gave him a
wow.
persistent cough for the rest of his life. But since he was not physically fit, they started training him as a blacksmith and was tending to the Russian army's horses behind the
Yeah.
lines. And then, because of his expertise, he was tending to 200 horses later for the governor
Mm,
of Kiev. When he was given the money to get out of the country, he
yeah.
hopped on a train, went to the western side of Europe, got on a boat, and took the boat to Ellis Island in New York City's harbor. And
Mm,
his name is registered there in 1914. And from there, he went to Baltimore, got jobs as clerks and stuff, and eventually opened a grocery store, and
mm,
then migrated to Washington, D.C., lived in Georgetown, had a furniture store, had a liquor
mm.
store, had a hardware store. And then my dad was born in Baltimore in 1917.
Yeah, that is such an amazing one, really. Thank you for sharing with us. That's quite beautiful. And you also know, David, your father's story touches. Many of the letters are filled with humor, like quite a lot of it. Even during a time as serious as World War II, you still have a bit of humor in it. Now, why do you think your father chose that tone? And how did it shape your own perspective of life or challenges? Let's see.
Well, he kept writing the letters to my brother Morris because Morris was encouraging him to get published.
Mm.
But he hated the idea of sending what was done back then. You sent a query letter to like the Washington Post. It says,
Oh.
I'd like to write an article for the Post about this, that, or the other thing. And then they would write back to him and reject him. So he hated to get rejected. So as a
Mm.
result of that, it's the reason I published this book, Letters from My Hymie, because now he's published.
Mm. That's a great one, also. And from your answer to that, it got me wondering. Were there any particular letters in it that stood out to you the most? One that made you laugh out loud or pause and reflect deeply on some of his experiences? I'm just curious.
Well, because he could write and because he could type, part of his time in the service was as a clerk.
Yeah,
And he signed a closet as his office in Tennessee, which at the time was one of the largest Army
yeah.
training facilities in the U.S. Army. And he says he's so thoroughly bored that he's reading Army regulations for amusement. Uh,
Mm,
he was constantly getting into trouble. So when he was based in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, he stole the commandant's motorcycle and
wow.
joyrided around the base. When they finally caught him, they sentenced him to kitchen patrol, where he had to peel a couple thousand potatoes every day.
Oh, wow.
I joke in the book that he served in every service. He was in the Army Air Force. He was in the Army. He
Mm,
first enlisted in 1941 in the Marines before Pearl Harbor, and they discharged him because he had flat feet. He was wandering around the streets of Washington, D.C. in
mm,
1942, and people would look at him, what's the matter with him? That He's an able-bodied young man, so he re-enlisted, and they stuck him in the Army infantry. And
Mm.
because of his disability, he got a $10 check every month for the rest of his
Wow.
life. Veterans Administration as compensation for his flat feet. Because
Mm.
he was fluent in Yiddish, which is very close to German, he then became an interpreter of the interrogations of the German prisoners of war in the POW camp in South Carolina during
Mm.
part of the war. And he used to write the base newsletter, which he humorously named Hot Flashes. And he was discussing the aspects of military life in the early 40s.
Mm.
So he was one of six siblings.
Wow.
One was the librarian I mentioned. Another was the FBI agent that worked hand in hand with J.
Mm.
Edgar Hoover to criminals. Another one keeping up the small business history
Wow.
of my grandfather, became a liquor store owner. Another one became a hardware store owner. So what I do with
Wow.
all the letters is before and after the letters based upon their date. I talk a little bit about the history of what was going on in the world, in Ukraine and in the United States and in the war. And
Mm.
one of the things I asked my dad about growing up is, did you know about the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were slaughtered in Europe?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, he did. And I said, well,
Mm.
what do you know about it? And he never answered my question. But in researching this book, I found that of the U.S. military at the time, I think it was about 300,000 people. 550,000 of them were Jewish, which
Wow.
represented about 11% of all American Jews at the time. So,
Mm.
yeah, they rallied to join the U.S. military to fight against the Holocaust and to
Wow.
fight against Hitler's domination of Europe.
That is such an experience, actually. I mean, those experiences back then of war are quite dreadful, are quite full of different stories, stories of love, stories of misplacement, story of loss, story of, death, story of grief, story of family dynamics, different kind of stories, actually. I mean, it's quite a lot during the war period. Yeah, it's quite amazing. I like the fact that you mentioned the Holocaust as well, as that was much more terrible even in itself. Thank you for sharing, David. And
You're
also,
welcome.
David, you've had an incredible career in product management, working with companies like Apple and HP, and training countless professionals as well. Now, looking back, what do you think has changed the most in the field? And what core principle have stayed the same for you?
And product management.
Yeah.
Well, I think a huge change has already occurred, and that is a recognition
Mm,
that product manager is responsible for product success, and that's a very important role for a company's
yeah.
success. And lately, artificial intelligence is going to begin to change everything. One of the things that I teach in my classes and in my books, like Building and Scaling Great Products and Successful Product Design and Management, which was published by Wiley. It's a little
Mm,
798-page pamphlet that's used in two graduate MBA schools in India for 6-month executive courses. Is
mm,
that it's not enough to do what's called outcome-based innovation or jobs to be done. You have to really understand what it is your prospective customer, whether it's an
mm,
individual or a company, wants to do. When do they want to do it? Where do they want to do it? How they want to do it? What's standing in their way? How important is it to get it done? And how satisfied are they with the current way of getting things done? So I emphasize, if you're going to do innovation and if you're going to do design thinking, you need to observe what people are doing and then interview them and survey them. And then if you have big data available, you
yeah.
can figure that out. Well, it occurred to me I've been getting a newsletter the last couple of weeks, which is a 5-minute read every day about the latest developments in artificial intelligence.
Mm,
And I thought back in the early 2000s, in order to have what we ought to have for product managers is
mm,
a Wikipedia, like a Wikipedia, but it's all the things that people
yeah.
and companies do. And now with artificial intelligence, I went to the tool that I use called
Mm,
Perplexity, and I put in the question, what is it that people do? And it came back categorized in about eight major categories. Things like they eat, they drink, they sleep, and that kind of stuff,
Wow.
fight, and so forth. And then I said, okay, which of these things can artificial intelligence do? And it came
Mm.
said for like eating and sleeping, AI can't do that. But for things like writing and creating music and movies and scripts, AI can do that.
Yeah.
One of the things that's going to happen is this whole cycle of speeding up understanding what it is that people and or companies want to do will be
Yeah.
substantially accelerated to
Mm.
the point that processes and procedures and filling out
Yeah.
forms, amalgamating data, which is a
Mm.
lot of what like Salesforce does. The
Absolutely.
president of Salesforce just in an interview the other day said that 30 to 50% of the work at Salesforce is now being done by artificial intelligence.
Honestly.
He could shrink his workforce, become more productive and more profitable. So
Yeah.
that's the huge change that we're going to see over the next 5 years.
That's a huge change, actually. Even I was having a conversation with a friend about that yesterday, and it's quite a lot, really. Thank you for sharing with us. Now, David, you've written an interesting book, War Team over there. Lovely one, really. But I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that stuck with me the most, particularly as a reader and writer myself, is to sit back and listen to readers' feedback. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of feedback have you gotten so far in respect to since your book has been published? What kind of do you find some people misunderstanding some part of the novel for another thing? Do you find them criticizing certain section of whatsoever? Like, what kind of feedback have you gotten so far since the book has been published?
Well, in terms of letters from my Hymie, I haven't gotten much feedback on it yet because I just released it.
Oh,
Um, but some people that have read it, they enjoy it. They like the stories, they like the color that's been added to history from the late 1800s from Ukraine through the United States up until
yeah.
the 1970s, which I cover in chronological order. But in my
Mm,
book, Building and Sailing Great Products, which I published in 2016, I gave a talk last year in January
wow.
to the International Association of Software Product Managers on the subject of AI in product management. And
Mm,
after I gave my presentation, I was walking through the campus at University of California, Berkeley, because I'd never seen it before, even though I've lived here in California since 1980. And a student came up to me and he asked for my signature. And he said he read my book, Building and Sailing Great Products, and he just wanted to thank me for sharing that knowledge with him
wow.
and wanted my autograph. And so I gave him my autograph, and then the value of the book probably plummeted by about 50%.
Oh wow. That's a beautiful one, really. I can imagine how that feels like. That's a beautiful one. Now, apart from letters from my email, what other work or book have you authored? Do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on apart from these letters?
Yeah. As soon as I finish up a few other things, I'm going to go back to work on a book that I started called Trippin, Trippin. And I
Mm,
have an image of me on the cover looking down at my tennis shoes, which are tied together.
mm,
And the subtitle will be Life's Little Laughs, an unauthorized autobiography.
mm. Oh, that's great. How far do you think that's gonna come up? Is it gonna be coming up quite soon, or is it next year? How far have you
Probably,
gone with it so far?
probably next year. I'll just feed it a few lines to AI, let it write the whole thing.
Oh, oh my goodness. That's quite fun to know. Now, I wanted to ask you, looking back on your years as a product manager, are there any pivotal moments or lessons that really shaped the way you approach product development today? And also, in your experience, what would you say are the key ingredients that makes a product truly successful?
I can boil it down to one word, values.
Mm,
Uh, HP had a thing of values that they called the HP way, which they followed for a little over 50 years. and that
Yeah.
was partially responsible for its growing 20% a year every year in sales for 50 years until
Mm.
Carly Farina came in and she blew up the values, centralized decision making, and Hewlett-Packard has been spinning into oblivion ever since the late 1990s. Worked for Apple, they had the Apple values, and I
Mm.
had found that Ann Bowers, who is the VP of HR, and before that, a consultant on HR to Apple in its
Mm.
early days, I suspect convinced the company to adopt a set of values. So they wrote them and adopted them. And when I was reading my book, Building a Sailing Great Products, the research, I looked back at the first Fortune 500 list of 500 companies, many of which I
Wow.
was familiar with because I had organized the National Student Organization in support of
Mm.
American supersonic transport, later in support of what you called FAST, Fly America's SST, or Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology. And I
Wow.
asked myself, of these 100 companies, which ones had values, which ones followed those values, and which ones are still in business today? And
Mm.
almost without exception, those companies that either had no values or did not follow their values, they were no longer in business. Those that had
Wow.
values and followed the values continue to thrive to this day. And part of the reason for that is when everyone would go into a room to consider making a decision, they were all
Yeah.
coming from a fundamental foundation of values that everybody in the room agreed to and lived by. So values is, I think, the most important thing for product success. That's also true in terms of personal success. I thought
Mm.
if that works on companies, I wonder about me. So I made a list of the 25 organizations that I've been associated with over the years, ranging from the flying club that I started at the University of Michigan to the FAST organization,
Wow.
to the Environmental Association of Minnesota, to being the manager of Al Quie for governor's campaign, to being a manager of John Connolly's presidential campaign in Minnesota, to HP and so
Mm.
forth, Apple. And I found that without exception,
Yeah.
those companies that had values and followed those values, I thrived in and I got promoted. I was very happy to get up every day and go to work there. For those companies that either didn't have values or if they had them, they didn't follow them, I was miserable. And
Mm.
happiest day was when they fired me or I quit. So I felt
Mm.
better the next day. So I told this
Wow.
story to a friend of mine that used to be my property manager of my rental condo that I have on the beach in Maui. And he was looking for a job in the Bay Area. And I said, after they ask you all their questions in your interview, ask them what their values are. And he did
Mm.
that in one of his job interviews, and he ended up talking to the hiring manager for about 4 hours about values. They hired him, and he's never been happier, and he's been promoted, and he's doing very, very well.
Mm.
Values is the key.
Mm. Oh, wow. You've shared a lot in that answer. I mean, I love your deep, quite amazing, quite energetic and educative answer to that, actually. Thank you for sharing with us. Yeah, thank you. And just in case we have some viewers who are watching this, who are writers, who are looking forward to publishing book like yourself, but they are stuck somewhere, either blocked by the so-called writer's block or they just don't know how to navigate through publishing. They just talk. They're looking forward to becoming an author, but it's quite something hard for them. What advice would you give people in this category? What would you tell someone stuck in this
Oh,
situation?
my first book was Building and Sailing Great Products, and I struggled with that for several
Mhm.
years
Yeah.
because I didn't know how to structure it. I didn't know how to organize it.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, it hit upon me that I could organize it around what I identified as the five keys to product success,
Mm-hmm.
which is the mnemonic of SPICE, of my company's name, SPICE name, which
Yeah.
you product market strategy, you've got to have repeatable processes. You got to have for the I, the information necessary to make informed decisions. For the
Mm-hmm.
C, understand what the customer wants to do, like I was talking about it earlier. And lastly, for the E, you got to make sure amongst all the people in your organization, along with your consultants, you have all the competencies, of which there's about 130 required to have
Mm,
product success. The thing I struggled with in that first book was getting it organized. The
mm,
second book was organizing and managing insanely great products. And that was a lot easier because I could come up with a structure, which is what a
mm.
lot of people call an outline right away. And then
Wow.
with Letters from My Hymie, that was easy, just to do it in chronological order. So
Mm,
that's the key, is come up with a structure and then just start doing your writing.
wow.
With Trippin, unauthorized autobiography, I just have a lot of stories to tell of my travels and adventures through the years,
Mm,
ranging from
mm.
when, as a pilot, I crashed my airplane in
Yeah.
northern Minnesota when it was 20 degrees below zero. So I'll tell that story,
Mm.
and other such stories. And I think I'll probably organize them in chronological fashion because
Oh,
that's going to be the
wow.
easiest way to get it done.
That's a beautiful one, really. I mean, I love your answer to this question. It sounds to me to be quite great, quite amazing, and quite awesome. And thank you very much for sharing with us. Yeah, that's a good advice you've got in there. Now, just in case we have some viewers who are watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of Letters from the Hymn. On what platform is it available on for purchase?
Letters from My Hymie is on Amazon. And
Oh,
you can just search for my name, David Fradin or Duke David Fradin on Amazon. And all of the books that I've written, including Letters from My Hymie, will show up.
that's great. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Letters from My Hymie directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles and David website and also another platform. I also left links to his social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, David, for coming up to sit down with me and have a conversation on your beautifully written title and your other works. This is so amazing. This is so great, beautiful, and wholesome that we can have a conversation around this. Thank you very much for coming on.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, really.